Welcome, dear dreamers, to a tale of wonder and whispers, a story woven with the quiet magic of hidden realms. Tonight, let your heart wander to a valley shrouded in mist, where ancient secrets bloom and kindness lights the way. Close your eyes, feel the softness of moonlight on your skin, and listen as we journey to the garden guarded by a silent giant, where only the pure of heart may enter. Let the gentle rhythm of this tale lull you into peace as you drift through the paths of courage and giving. Now, breathe deeply and let the story guide you into restful dreams. The hidden garden lay in a valley shrouded in mist, veiled by secrets as old as the stars. Few dared to journey into its shadows, and fewer still believed in its existence. Yet in every village and every hearth across the land, the legend of the hidden garden was told, of flowers that bloomed only for those with the purest of hearts. They were not ordinary flowers, villagers said. No, these flowers held something far more precious than beauty alone. Each petal was rumored to contain a glow, a light as soft as moonbeams and as silent as a distant echo. Some claimed the flowers sang, not with voices, but with a harmony that spoke directly to the soul. The glow they held was not merely light, but memory itself, an essence left behind by every pure-hearted soul that had ever set foot there. These flowers did not bloom for all to see, for their magic was hidden and guarded, known only to those who possessed the rare qualities of kindness, courage, and an unclouded heart. The villagers spoke too of a giant who guarded this fabled garden. No one knew where he had come from, or if he was of the earth or sky or something beyond either. Tall as the ancient trees, with a gaze deep and knowing, the giant was bound to his duty with a patience that stretched beyond mortal years. He kept watch over the garden as if it were his life's very purpose, a task he held sacred and unwavering. He would appear, it was said, when a seeker came near, standing in silence, measuring the heart of anyone bold enough to seek out his flowers. Many had tried to find the garden, drawn by the promise of beauty, or by tales of wish-granting petals. But the giant knew the hearts of men, and none who came out of greed or vanity had ever laid eyes on the hidden valley. Those who sought only for themselves found their paths lost, swallowed by forests that whispered secrets they could not understand, by rivers that misled them, and by shadows that deepened with every selfish thought. For the garden and the giant who guarded it knew the truth of a seeker's heart. As time wore on, fewer dared to seek the garden, dismissing it as mere fantasy or bedtime lore. But for those who listened with open hearts and dreaming minds, the legend persisted, whispered by the old who had not forgotten the ways of magic and mystery. To those few, the tale was not just a story. It was a call, as soft as the sigh of a breeze over wildflowers and as persistent as the pull of the stars. One evening, under a sky strewn with 1,000 distant lights, two young souls sat by the fire, captivated by the tale of the hidden garden. Lyra, a girl with laughter as light as sunlight through leaves, and Einar, a quiet boy whose heart held kindness as deep as a well. Both felt the story stir something within them, a longing that neither could put into words. Though they had heard the story 100 times before, on this night it felt different. It was as though the giant's garden was not merely a place, but a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The storyteller, an old woman with a voice as worn as river stones, saw the glimmer in their eyes. She leaned closer, her gaze sharp as she whispered the words that so many had dismissed or forgotten. "Remember," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. "The giant guards the flowers for those who come not with wanting, but with giving. Only the pure of heart can find his garden. To seek it, you must come with something more than yourself." Lyra and Einar exchanged glances, each seeing in the other a spark, a silent understanding. And so, as the stars wheeled across the night, they made a quiet pact to seek the garden, and perhaps to see what only a few in all of time had ever seen. They did not know if they would succeed, nor if the garden would open itself to them, but they knew that the journey had already begun. Little did they know that somewhere beyond the veil of their world, the giant had already sensed their decision. He felt it like a tremor in the earth beneath him, a ripple in the air that stirred the ancient power of his charge. His eyes, dark and patient, watched over the garden he had sworn to protect. He knew that two young seekers were on their way, and that soon the garden would decide whether they were worthy to witness its secret bloom. And so, as Lyra and Einar readied themselves to leave at first light, the mist deepened in the valley, and the shadows of the hidden garden waited, biding their time with the patience of ages. Morning dawned, shrouded in pale mist and gentle light, as Lyra and Einar set out from the village. They carried no maps, for none could guide them to the hidden garden. Instead, they held only the whispers of legend and the quiet guidance of their own hearts. The forest loomed ahead, an ancient world of towering trees and dark shadows, where daylight barely reached the forest floor, and where even the birds sang in low, haunting melodies. As they entered the woods, the air grew thick and cool, with a scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Lyra walked lightly, her laughter subdued now, her eyes wide with wonder as she peered into the dark undergrowth. Einar followed in silence, his expression calm, but his gaze watchful, as though every shadow might hold the secret they sought. The path before them was faint, more a suggestion than a trail, weaving between trees that grew older and stranger with each step. Yet, they were not alone. The forest, though still, seemed to be listening. every crackle of leaves beneath their feet, every soft whisper between them, felt as though it echoed back, as if the trees themselves bore witness to their journey. Einar noticed that in places, the branches seemed to reach down, creating a canopy that both sheltered and obscured them, while roots stretched across the path like the fingers of sleeping giants. Then, as they ventured deeper, small signs began to reveal themselves, signs only for those with gentle eyes. A silver fox appeared, its coat glinting in the faint light as it watched them from a distance, unblinking. When Lyra took a step closer, it darted away, only to pause further up the path, as though waiting for them to follow. They exchanged a glance, and Lyra nodded, her face alight with wonder. And so they continued, letting the fox lead them further into the heart of the forest. Time in the woods stretched and contracted, slipping past like a stream. As they walked, Einar's heart began to feel the weight of the journey, not just in his feet, but in his very spirit. He was reminded of the elder's words. The giant guards the flowers for those who come not with wanting, but with giving. He wondered what it meant to give without seeking, to walk a path without expecting a reward at its end. At that moment, he noticed a faint sound, barely more than a murmur in the air, like the rustling of leaves against stone. Following the sound, he saw a small bird caught in the thorny grasp of a bramble. It struggled, its wings flapping weakly, its eyes bright with fear. Without a word, Einar knelt, reaching out carefully, his fingers gentle as he freed the creature from its thorny prison. The bird lingered a moment, its tiny eyes meeting his, as though offering silent thanks, before it flew away into the shadowed trees. Lyra watched in quiet admiration. "It's as though the forest is testing us," she said, her voice soft, carrying the weight of realization. They pressed on, following the fox as it vanished and reappeared through twists and turns. They came to a stream, its waters dark as midnight, yet glimmering with points of light, as though stars had fallen into its depths. Lyra bent down, her fingers tracing the surface, and as her hand touched the water, a gentle ripple spread outward, revealing tiny fish that glowed like embers. She laughed, her voice a delicate echo against the trees, and in that sound there was a warmth that seemed to reach every corner of the forest. As they continued, they encountered yet another creature, a young deer, limping slightly, its leg caught in a snare. Lyra moved forward, her hands gentle as she freed the animal, her touch so light it barely startled. The deer looked at her, eyes wide and clear, before slipping back into the shadows, leaving them alone once more. Einar felt something shift within him, as though the forest was showing him the essence of their journey. It was not a quest to find the garden, he realized, but a passage through kindness itself. Every creature they encountered, every gesture of compassion, seemed to open a new path, as if the forest responded to the goodness they offered. The silver fox led them to the edge of a great clearing where the light faded into soft twilight. Here the trees were thicker, their trunks twisted and knotted like the hands of an ancient storyteller weaving a tale. In the dimness ahead the giant stood, a figure immense and silent, cloaked in shadows, his gaze as deep as the night sky. For a moment, they felt the weight of his presence, the gravity of the protector who had watched over the garden for countless lifetimes. His eyes held a question, an unspoken demand that went beyond words. But Lyra and Einar did not flinch. They stood before him, their hearts open, carrying nothing but the kindness they had shown along the way. And as the giant watched them, his expression softened, as though seeing something he had waited lifetimes to witness. Slowly he stepped aside, and with a sweep of his hand, the mist parted. The hidden garden lay beyond, waiting to bloom for those who had come with pure hearts, for those who had walked the path of giving and not of taking. Lyra and Einar stepped forward, their breaths held, as the giant's watchful gaze followed them, blessing their passage into the garden they had earned. Stepping beyond the giant's silent watch, Lyra and Einar found themselves in a world unlike any they had ever seen. The hidden garden was concealed within a hollow ring of trees, where every leaf, every branch seemed to breathe a quiet magic, whispering secrets lost to time. The air grew warmer, heavy with the fragrance of flowers that had yet to reveal themselves, as though the garden was still deciding whether to trust these two gentle souls who had dared to seek it. As they moved forward, an eerie stillness settled over them, and even the faint rustle of their steps felt like a distant echo. The garden held its breath, watching, waiting. They passed through winding paths, bordered by leaves that shimmered with a faint, otherworldly light, as if touched by moonlight even in the absence of the moon. The trees that enclosed them were tall and ancient, their roots weaving into the ground like veins carrying the heartbeat of the garden. For a time, the two walked in silence, feeling the weight of the journey they had undertaken. Lyra's gaze darted around, her eyes wide with awe, while Einar's steps were slow, almost reverent, as he absorbed every detail. They could feel the presence of the giant behind them, a silent sentinel at the garden's edge, his watchful eyes never leaving them. The further they walked, the more the garden revealed itself in small, wondrous ways. Here, a cluster of luminous mushrooms glowed from beneath a moss-covered stone, casting a pale blue light across their path. There, a tiny stream ran clear as glass, its waters sparkling as though infused with stars, trickling over rocks as smooth as silk. Every leaf, every petal held a sheen of magic, as if the very air was woven with light. The silence was broken by the soft melodic chirping of an unseen bird, its song light as a sigh, drifting through the stillness. It sounded like a lullaby from a dream, a melody that lingered in the mind long after it faded. Lyra felt her heart swell, a strange ache that was both joy and sorrow, as though the garden was showing her memories she had never lived. Einar knelt by a patch of flowers, their petals folded shut, waiting. He reached out, brushing a fingertip over the edge of a petal. For a brief moment it trembled, a faint light flickering from within, like a tiny soul stirring in its sleep. He pulled back, his breath caught, afraid to disturb the garden's delicate slumber. "It's as though they're waiting for something," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. Lyra nodded, her hand resting against the bark of an ancient tree, feeling its slow, steady life humming beneath her fingers. "Perhaps they're waiting for us to prove ourselves worthy," she murmured. Her eyes wandered upward, to where a vine twisted around the tree's trunk, its leaves dappled with a faint golden glow. The garden continued to guide them forward, the path turning and twisting, leading them deeper into its heart. They came to a small clearing where a single flower grew, a delicate white bloom with petals as soft as silk and edges that glowed faintly, like the last light of a setting sun. Lyra and Einar exchanged a glance, a shared understanding passing between them. Neither spoke, but each felt the weight of this moment, as if the garden itself were offering them a glimpse of its soul. Lyra knelt beside the flower, her hands hovering just above it, as though afraid to disturb its fragile beauty. Slowly, the petals began to unfold, revealing a soft, luminous core. Einar joined her, and as they watched, the flower's light grew, warming the air around them. It was not a bright light, but a soft, gentle radiance that wrapped around them, filling their hearts with an indescribable peace. At that moment, they understood. The garden was alive, not just in the way plants and trees were, but in a way that touched the deepest parts of their spirits. This place held the memories of all those who had come before them, those who had passed the test of kindness, and it offered these memories not as a prize, but as a blessing. It was a place woven from the threads of pure hearts, a tapestry of compassion and courage that grew richer with each soul that entered with a selfless heart. As the flower's light faded, Lyra felt tears well in her eyes, though she could not say why. It was a sorrow mixed with joy, a feeling of having witnessed something sacred. She turned to Einar, whose eyes too were shining with the same unspoken emotion. They shared a silent moment, their hearts woven together by the quiet magic of the garden. The garden had accepted them. They could feel it, a warmth that wrapped around them like an embrace, a promise that they were now part of its story, part of its legend. For as long as they held kindness in their hearts, the garden would live on within them, a hidden light that could never be dimmed. As they stood in that enchanted clearing, the first petal bloomed fully, unfolding with a radiance that spread across the garden, waking flower after flower in a cascade of gentle light. The hidden garden, once cloaked in mystery, now blossomed under the watchful gaze of the giant, who smiled, his silent blessing wrapping around the pure-hearted seekers. And for a moment, in the midst of this blooming wonder, Lyra and Einar felt themselves woven into the garden, their hearts forever bound to its ancient magic. The hidden garden lay bathed in a quiet light, as if the night itself had been suspended. Lyra and Einar moved through its glistening paths, their breath soft and reverent, knowing now that they were within a place of ancient secrets. Yet, even as the flowers bloomed gently around them, the garden had one last mystery to unveil, one final test hidden deep within its beauty. The air grew thick, laden with an unspoken promise as they reached a circle of stones. Each stone was smooth, their surfaces worn by ages of wind and rain, and on each one was a faint carving, symbols that seemed almost alive, pulsing faintly with an inner glow. In the center lay a pool, its water as still and dark as polished glass. As Lyra and Einar approached, they felt a tremor run through the ground, subtle but unmistakable, like the heartbeat of something vast and eternal. From behind them came a soft sound, a low murmur that rose like distant thunder, and the giant appeared once more. He stood in silence, his shadow stretching across the garden, his face unreadable. His gaze held a gravity that sent a shiver through their hearts. Lyra looked to Einar, and without a word, they understood that this was the true moment of their journey, the test that would determine whether they were truly worthy. The giant extended one massive hand, his fingers curled around something small, and as he opened it, they saw two shimmering lights, a delicate sphere for each of them, glowing softly in his rough palm. Each sphere was a faint echo of the flowers around them, but brighter, more alive, holding a quiet, pulsing light that seemed to draw their very souls. The giant's voice, deep as the roots of mountains and soft as the murmur of leaves, filled the clearing. To walk among these flowers, you must carry more than kindness alone, he intoned. To be part of this garden's life, you must offer a piece of yourselves to it. These lights, he said, holding them gently, are not mere gifts, but mirrors of your hearts. You must give freely, with no thought of return, and in so doing, you will reveal the strength of your spirits. He held out his hand, the lights hovering just within their reach, and waited. Einar stepped forward first. He took a breath, his heart pounding, feeling a strange weight settle within him. He thought of the path he had walked, of the creatures he had helped, and the kindness he had offered. In that moment, he felt a warmth rise in his chest, a sense of peace that gave him the courage to reach forward. He touched the sphere lightly, and instantly, a wave of emotion flooded through him. Memories of his home, his family, every tender moment he had cherished. And with that warmth, he felt the sphere absorb a piece of him, a piece so subtle he hadn't known he could give it away. The light shimmered brighter, lifting from his hand and floating above the pool, casting a golden glow over the water. Einar felt a strange mixture of loss and fullness, as though he had given something precious, but gained something even greater in return. Lyra stepped forward next, her hands trembling, yet her heart steady. She too touched the sphere, and in that instant, memories flooded her mind, moments of laughter and light, times when she had lifted others and felt their joy fill her heart. She remembered her mother's voice, her father's hands guiding her as she learned to walk, the comfort of her grandmother's stories by the fireside. As her fingers brushed the sphere, she felt a piece of herself drift into the light, leaving her yet filling her with a sense of unity with the garden itself. Her light lifted into the air beside Einar's, casting a silvery glow beside his golden one, the two lights entwining like twin stars in the night sky. The giant watched in silence, his expression softening, a flicker of pride in his ancient eyes. He raised one hand, and with a slow, graceful movement, he drew the two lights downward. They settled over the pool, merging with the dark water, sending a rippling wave of light across the garden. As the lights vanished into the water, something extraordinary happened. The garden, already radiant, seemed to awaken to a new level of life. Flowers bloomed in every direction, petals unfolding in a glorious cascade of colours, each one brighter and more vibrant than before. The light danced over every leaf and petal, illuminating the entire garden with a brilliance that seemed to pulse in time with Lyra and Einar's own hearts. In that instant, they understood. The garden had not merely wanted kindness, but courage. The courage to give freely, to allow a part of themselves to live on in the garden, bound to it forever. They felt their hearts swell with a joy so deep it was almost sorrowful, a connection so profound it surpassed anything they had ever known. The giant, his duty fulfilled, gave them a silent nod. His towering figure faded slowly back into the trees, leaving them alone in the heart of the garden, surrounded by the blooming flowers that would carry their light forever. As they stood in the glow, Lyra reached for Einar's hand, and together they took in the beauty around them, knowing that they had become part of the garden's legend. The flowers, their petals gleaming, bore a piece of their souls now, a gift to be shared with all those who would come with open hearts and the courage to give. And thus, in that magical, fleeting moment, the hidden garden bloomed not just for them, but because of them, woven forever into the eternal cycle of kindness and courage. As the last traces of the giant's shadow faded into the trees, Lyra and Einar stood in silence, awestruck by the garden around them. The flowers, now fully awake, glowed with a light that felt almost alive, as though they had absorbed the pure essence of the two young seekers and transformed it into something eternal. Every petal, every leaf seemed to pulse in time with an unseen rhythm, a silent song that filled the garden with a peace as deep as the night sky. Lyra could feel the pulse of the garden within her own chest, a soft thrum that matched the beat of her heart. She looked at Einar, whose eyes held the same wonder she felt, and together they took in the beauty that surrounded them. Each flower was a unique masterpiece, petals in shades of blue like the first light of dawn, others in fiery red, while some held the pale, ghostly glow of starlight. This was no ordinary garden. It was a realm where every blossom told a story, a silent witness to the countless souls who had once walked this path. Slowly, they began to walk, marveling at the transformation of the place they had come so far to find. The flowers seemed to lean toward them as they passed, their petals whispering against one another, a gentle murmur that sounded almost like words. And though they could not understand the language, they felt its meaning deep in their bones. Gratitude, remembrance, a celebration of the kindness they had brought. In the distance, the sky began to deepen from twilight to night, casting a dark canopy over the garden. But the darkness did not dim the flowers' light. If anything, it made them shine even brighter, illuminating the garden in a soft, ethereal glow. Lyra felt as if they were standing in the heart of a dream, a place that existed beyond the borders of reality, where time held no sway and beauty had no bounds. Then, as they reached the center of the garden, they saw something remarkable. A single tree, ancient and majestic, stood alone, its branches reaching high above them. Unlike the other trees that encircled the garden, this one was covered in blooms of its own, flowers that seemed woven from moonlight, each petal shimmering like silver under the night sky. At the base of the tree, nestled within its roots, was a small pool of water, perfectly still, mirroring the glow of the blossoms above. Lyra and Einar knelt by the pool, drawn to its quiet depths. They looked into the water, expecting to see only their reflections, but instead saw a vision unfold, a memory held within the heart of the garden. They watched as scenes from their journey appeared, ghostly and dreamlike, replaying the moments of kindness and courage they had shown. Einar freeing the tiny bird from the thorns, Lyra gently releasing the wounded deer. And as they watched, each act of compassion unfolded into flowers, blooming within the water like memories brought to life. Einar felt a swell of emotion, a deep understanding that the garden had been watching all along, marking their path with gentle guidance and quiet tests, each one shaping them, leading them to this very moment. The hidden garden had accepted them, had become a part of them, and in doing so, had woven their lives into its eternal tapestry. As they rose, the air around them shifted, a light breeze stirring the petals and carrying with it a warmth that felt like a blessing. The giant appeared once more, standing at the edge of the clearing, his gaze softer now, his presence imbued with a quiet pride. He watched them in silence, his towering form blending with the shadows, a guardian both solemn and serene. Then, in a voice as deep as the earth and as gentle as the wind, he spoke, his words filling the garden like an ancient hymn. "You have walked this path not as seekers, but as givers," he intoned, his gaze resting upon them with a kindness that felt like the touch of the garden itself. "You have offered your hearts to this place, and so the garden offers you its blessing. You are now part of its story, and it is part of yours." With a slow, graceful movement, the giant reached down, and from the ground, 2 delicate blooms rose, one for each of them. Lyra's was a blossom of the purest white, its petals edged with a faint, silvery glow, while Ainar's was deep blue, as dark as the sky before dawn, with a quiet shimmer at its heart. These flowers, woven from the garden's magic, held the memory of their journey, a token of the kindness they had given and the courage they had shown. They accepted the flowers, feeling the warmth of the giant's blessing flow through them, filling them with a strength and peace they had never known. As they held the blossoms, they understood that these were not mere tokens, but a part of the garden's spirit, a gift that would stay with them, binding them forever to this sacred place. The giant, his duty fulfilled, took a step back, his form melting into the shadows, his watchful eyes the last to fade. And as he disappeared, the garden itself seemed to breathe a final sigh, a soft exhalation of peace, as though it, too, had found fulfillment in their presence. Lyra and Einar lingered for a moment longer, breathing in the scent of the flowers, feeling the warmth of the garden's embrace. Then, with a shared glance and a silent vow to carry its magic with them, they turned and began their journey back, leaving the hidden garden behind. But they knew they would never truly leave it, for the garden's light would live on in their hearts, a quiet glow that would guide them, remind them, and forever connect them to the ancient magic they had found. And thus, the hidden garden of flowers remained, waiting patiently under the watchful gaze of the giant, for the next souls to seek its blessing, to walk the path of kindness, and to carry its light into the world beyond.